The year was 1955. A quiet town, a trusted doctor, and then silence. One evening, Dr. Harold Whitmore locked the door of his small office on the corner of Maple and 3rd. Neighbors recalled seeing him close up early. Unusual for a man known for working late into the night, often scribbling notes under the dim yellow glow of his desk lamp. But when the sun rose the next morning, his office remained sealed. By noon, whispers began. The doctor hadn't come home. By nightfall, his patients were knocking on his door, calling his name. No response. Police eventually forced their way inside. What they found sent shockwaves through the community. The office looked as if time had stopped mid-motion. His stethoscope lay draped across the patient's chair. A cup of coffee had gone cold, untouched. Medical charts were scattered across his desk, some torn as if yanked hastily. And in the center of the room, sitting neatly on the examination table, was something that made seasoned officers freeze in place. It wasn't blood. It wasn't a body. It wasn't even a weapon. It was a single leather-bound journal. The doctor's handwriting scrawled across the first page read only one chilling line. From that moment, the story of Dr. Whitmore stopped being just another missing person case. It became a riddle, a twisting puzzle that no one could solve. For weeks, the town was gripped by fear. Rumors swirled. Had he discovered something he shouldn't have? Was he silenced for a medical secret? Or was something far darker? And why did every clue found in his office seem to point to someone different? Almost as if the scene had been staged. Decades later, people still whisper about that night. Some say the office was cursed. Others claim the journal was a hoax. But one fact remains undeniable. Dr. Harold Whitmore vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions. And the deeper you dig into this case, the more disturbing it becomes. Because the truth, as you'll soon see, is far stranger than anyone ever imagined. Before his disappearance, Dr. Harold Whitmore was not just another name on a small-town directory. He was the heartbeat of Maplewood. Born in 1909, Harold grew up in the very town where he would later establish his practice. His childhood was quiet, marked by endless hours spent reading medical books far beyond his years. Neighbors often recalled seeing the boy with thick glasses perched on the edge of his nose, sketching human anatomy in the margins of school notebooks, while other children played ball in the street. By the time Harold entered college, his brilliance was undeniable. He graduated top of his class at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, where professors noted his unusual curiosity, not just about curing diseases, but about understanding the human mind, the strange behaviors, the unexplainable phenomena patients often whispered about, but rarely documented. Some said Harold wasn't just a doctor of the body, but a seeker of mysteries within the human condition itself. In 1938, after completing his residency in Philadelphia, Harold returned to Maplewood. The town, then modest and quiet, welcomed him warmly. He opened his small private practice on Maple and 3rd, a modest brick building with 2 examination rooms, a cramped office, and a waiting area filled with the scent of old magazines. His patients adored him. He listened. He cared. He treated the poor without charging them a dime. But behind the charm and kindness, those closest to him saw something else: obsession. Harold was never married. He had no children. His family was long gone, his parents both passing away before 1950. What he did have was his work. Late at night, the glow of his office lamp was the last light burning in town. He filled journals, hundreds of them, documenting not just symptoms and treatments, but dreams, fears, and confessions his patients whispered to him. He believed medicine wasn't just about treating bodies, but decoding lives. Friends worried about him. They said he was becoming consumed, that his curiosity had crossed into something darker. There were rumors of experiments, not illegal, but strange. Patients noted he sometimes asked them questions that seemed unrelated to their ailments. "Do you ever feel watched?" one woman remembered him asking. Another recalled him insisting on recording not just her blood pressure, but the exact words of a nightmare she described casually. By 1954, whispers began to spread. Some said he had found something in those journals, patterns no one else could see. Others said he had stumbled upon secrets the townsfolk would rather keep buried. A few even claimed Harold spoke of being followed, though he never told police or friends who he believed was watching him. Yet to the outside world, Harold remained the kind, tireless doctor everyone respected. Churchgoers saw him in the same pew every Sunday morning. Children waved at him as he walked down the street with his leather medical bag. He was part of the rhythm of life in Maplewood, which is why, when he disappeared in 1955, the shock was unbearable. This was not a man who vanished without reason, not a man who would run away. Harold Whitmore was the town's anchor, and the thought that something or someone had pulled him away sent ripples of dread through every household. What no one knew at the time was that Harold had been living a double life of sorts. Beloved physician by day, secret chronicler of hidden truths by night, and buried within those handwritten journals, investigators would later find hints of a man who believed his work was dangerous. Not because of what he did, but because of what he knew. And if Harold's ominous final note was to be believed, if anything happens to me, it was not an accident, then his disappearance was not just a mystery. It was a warning. March 12, 1955, a Saturday, the day Maplewood would never forget. That morning began like any other. Dr. Harold Whitmore opened his office at exactly 8 a.m., greeting his first patients with his usual polite smile. He was seen walking briskly through the town square at lunchtime, his leather satchel tucked under his arm. To anyone watching, he appeared calm, focused, and entirely himself. No one suspected that within hours, he would vanish forever. The last confirmed sighting came just after 6:30 p.m. A local grocer recalled seeing him lock the door of his office earlier than usual. He waved briefly before disappearing inside. After that, the town's beloved physician was never seen again. When Harold failed to attend Sunday service the next morning, eyebrows rose. By Monday afternoon, his absence became impossible to ignore. Patients arrived at his office to find the door locked, blinds drawn. His house, barely 2 blocks away, was empty. His car sat untouched in the driveway. By Tuesday evening, neighbors contacted the police. Officers forced open the office door and stepped into what appeared, at first glance, to be an ordinary room frozen in time. But the details told another story. Inside, the atmosphere was wrong, too quiet, too staged. The first thing officers noticed was the coffee cup on the desk. The liquid inside was stone cold, thick with residue, suggesting it had been sitting for days. Beside it, his stethoscope lay stretched across a patient chair as though he'd dropped it mid-examination. Medical files littered the desk, some ripped, some smudged with ink. On the floor near the examination table, one drawer from a filing cabinet had been yanked completely out, its contents scattered like someone had searched it in a hurry. And then there was the journal. A black leather-bound book sat neatly in the center of the exam table, almost too deliberate in its placement. The first page bore the chilling note. If anything happens to me, it was not an accident. What lay beyond that opening line was equally disturbing. Cryptic entries about patterns in dreams, recurring visions described by multiple patients, and mentions of voices Harold claimed some had reported hearing at night. Was it medical observation, or something else entirely? But what unsettled investigators most wasn't the journal. It was the complete absence of Harold himself. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned chairs, no blood, no broken glass. The back door was locked from the inside, and the windows were latched. His coat hung neatly on the rack. His wallet and watch were still in the office drawer. His car keys sat in their usual spot on his desk. It was as though Harold had simply evaporated, yet small details hinted otherwise. The torn files, why only some? A faint, strange smell lingered in the office, one officer later described as metallic like rust or ozone. A single light bulb in the hallway had burned out, leaving that section of the office eerily dark. And outside, muddy footprints trailed faintly across the back steps before disappearing into the grass. When word spread of the scene, Maplewood erupted in rumor. Some swore Harold had been taken by force. Others whispered he had staged his own vanishing act. Religious townsfolk muttered about curses, pointing to the journal's bizarre references to dreams and voices. The police sealed off the office, treating it as a potential crime scene. They collected the journal, dusted for fingerprints, and interviewed every patient who had seen him that week. Yet the trail went cold almost immediately. There were no ransom notes, no sightings, no evidence of travel. By the end of March, Maplewood was suffocating under fear. Shops closed early. Doors were double-bolted at night. Parents told children not to walk past the doctor's office after dark. And in hushed tones, neighbors asked the same question over and over again. How does a man vanish from a locked room without leaving a trace? The office remained sealed, a haunting reminder every time townsfolk walked by. And while the investigation pressed forward, one truth had already cemented itself in the minds of those who knew Dr. Harold Whitmore. Whatever had happened inside that office, it wasn't ordinary. It was something darker, something the town wasn't ready to face. The investigation into Dr. Harold Whitmore's disappearance began with urgency. Maplewood wasn't a city accustomed to scandal, let alone mystery. In 1955, the town was tight-knit and law enforcement was modest. Just a small police department with a handful of officers, led by Chief Walter Briggs, a man nearing retirement who had seen his fair share of bar fights and petty thefts, but nothing like this. Briggs arrived at the doctor's office on the evening of March 15th. He was one of the first to examine the eerie scene after the initial officers had secured it. To him, something about the office felt wrong. Not messy in the way a robbery might leave it, but deliberate, almost as if it had been staged to send a message. The coffee, the scattered files, the perfectly placed journal, all too convenient, too theatrical. The journal immediately became the focal point. Detectives flipped through its pages, expecting to find routine notes on patient care. Instead, they discovered cryptic writings, references to patterns among patients' subconscious, and shared images of corridors and voices filled the margins. There were charts with strange symbols that didn't align with standard medical notation. One entry, dated just a week before his disappearance, read, "They keep returning with the same story. Different faces, same visions. It cannot be coincidence." But what troubled investigators most was his last entry, written the very night he vanished. It ended abruptly, mid-sentence. "If they find out what I've..." The pen mark dragged off the page, as though interrupted. Briggs ordered the journal to be sent to the state police for further examination. Meanwhile, Maplewood officers canvassed the neighborhood. Residents recalled nothing unusual that night. No screams, no signs of forced entry. One neighbor did mention seeing a car idling across the street around 7 p.m., a dark-colored sedan with no plates she could remember. Another claimed they'd noticed a man in a long coat smoking by the lamppost earlier that week, though no one recognized him. Harold's personal life was dissected. Investigators combed through his modest home. It was neat, almost sterile, with shelves stacked with medical texts and journals. No signs of struggle there either. His bank account showed no unusual activity. No pack bags. No indication he'd planned to leave. To police, this wasn't the profile of a man who vanished willingly. Then came the interviews with his patients. Some described Harold as his usual caring self in the days before he disappeared. Others recalled him being distracted. "He kept asking about my dreams," one man said, puzzled. "Not my cough, not my chest pains. He wanted to know if I saw the corridor too. I didn't know what he meant." Another patient admitted Harold seemed paranoid, insisting he felt watched while walking home at night. The strangest testimony came from a young boy, about 10 years old, who had visited Harold for a fever just 2 days before the disappearance. His mother told investigators the doctor asked her son to draw whatever came to mind before the exam. The boy sketched a long hallway filled with doorways, and at the end, a shadowy figure. Harold reportedly stared at the drawing for a long time before dismissing them with a distracted nod. Despite mounting oddities, Briggs had to ground the investigation in reality. They explored logical explanations. Kidnapping, but there was no ransom demand. Robbery, yet nothing was stolen. His wallet, his watch, even cash in his desk drawer remained untouched. Suicide, but there was no body, no note, except the journal, which suggested the opposite. Detectives broadened their scope. Harold's colleagues in nearby towns were contacted. None reported unusual behavior beyond his eccentric note-taking. State police joined, interviewing anyone who had crossed paths with Harold in recent weeks. A few remembered him traveling briefly to a medical conference in Boston the month prior, where he reportedly asked other doctors peculiar questions about shared patient hallucinations. No one took him seriously. As weeks turned into months, the investigation grew colder. Evidence dwindled. The only tangible clue remained a journal, but its strange writings baffled both law enforcement and medical experts. Psychologists suggested Harold might have been unraveling mentally, perhaps succumbing to delusions. Others dismissed the journal as the ramblings of an overworked doctor. Still, Chief Briggs wasn't convinced. Too many things didn't add up. Why lock the office from the inside? Why scatter only certain files? And why write that chilling line if he wasn't truly afraid? By May, frustration mounted. Without new leads, the state police scaled back involvement, leaving Maplewood officers with a case that seemed impossible to solve. The townsfolk, however, hadn't forgotten. Rumors consumed the streets. Some believed Harold had uncovered something sinister in his patient stories, something someone wanted buried. Others whispered about government experiments, secret societies, even supernatural forces. Children dared each other to press their faces against the office windows at night, claiming they saw shadows move inside. The case file remained open but inactive. By summer, Chief Briggs quietly admitted to reporters, "We don't know what happened to Dr. Whitmore. We don't know if he left on his own, if he was taken, or if something else happened entirely. All we know is he's gone." But behind closed doors, Briggs couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was still hidden in plain sight, that somewhere within Harold's meticulous notes and cryptic words lay the key. He just didn't know how to read it. And so, the investigation stalled. Maplewood moved forward but uneasily. The locked office remained a scar in the heart of town. And every so often, someone walking by would stop, glance at the boarded-up windows, and whisper to themselves, "What really happened in there?" Every missing persons case needs a villain, or at least someone to pin suspicions on. And in the weeks after Dr. Harold Whitmore's disappearance, Maplewood became a town of whispers and pointing fingers. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had someone in mind, but none of it stuck. The first suspect emerged naturally, a disgruntled patient. Harold treated dozens of people every week. Could one of them have snapped? Police zeroed in on a man named Richard Hanley, a war veteran who had been struggling with night terrors. Richard had visited Harold multiple times in the month leading up to the disappearance. Neighbors claimed they heard shouting during one of his late-night appointments. Richard himself admitted Harold had pushed him too far with questions about his recurring nightmares. "He kept asking me about the same hallway," Richard told investigators, "like he wanted me to confirm something. I told him to leave me alone." Suspicious? Yes. But Richard had a rock-solid alibi the night Harold vanished. He was out of town, visiting his sister. Next, investigators turned their gaze toward Harold's assistant, Margaret Owens. She was a quiet, middle-aged woman who had worked with him for nearly a decade. Some describe her as loyal, others as resentful. She admitted to police that Harold had become different in recent months, more secretive, less trusting. According to Margaret, he had started locking certain files in his desk drawer, forbidding her from touching them. When investigators pressed her about the journal, she insisted she had never seen it before. Dr. Whitmore had his private ways, she said, but he wasn't a man who would just disappear. Margaret seemed genuinely distraught, but skeptics wondered, did she know more than she let on? The police eventually cleared her, finding no motive and no evidence. Then there was the mysterious man in the long coat. Multiple residents mentioned seeing him near Harold's office in the days leading up to his disappearance. Some described him as tall, with a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. No one recognized him as a local. One shopkeeper swore he'd seen the man step into Harold's office after hours. But no record existed of such a visit. Detectives canvassed nearby towns and boarding houses, searching for a stranger who matched the description, but found nothing. It was as if the man had vanished, too. Chief Briggs also considered Harold's professional rivals. Though Maplewood was small, Harold occasionally clashed with doctors from neighboring towns. Some thought him eccentric, even reckless. One physician, Dr. Alan Reeves, dismissed Harold's obsession with patient dreams as nonsense bordering on quackery. But rivalry wasn't enough to justify murder, or so it seemed. Reeves had a clear alibi, attending a medical conference in Chicago. Others in the medical community admitted Harold had grown increasingly paranoid, but none had reason to harm him. For a brief time, suspicion even fell on the state authorities themselves. Why had the state police quickly pulled out of the case? Why had the journal, sent to them for examination, returned weeks later with several pages missing? Officially, the explanation was mundane. The pages were simply misplaced. But in Maplewood, the rumor mill churned. Some claimed the state covered something up, that Harold had stumbled onto research, perhaps government experiments, that he shouldn't have. After all, 1955 was a time when whispers of Cold War secrets and shadowy agencies were everywhere. But without proof, the theory remained nothing more than fearful speculation. And then there were the townsfolk themselves. In small communities, suspicion has a way of poisoning relationships. A farmer swore he'd seen Margaret Owens burning papers in her backyard the night after Harold vanished, though no evidence of that was ever found. A local teenager claimed he saw Harold walking toward the woods on the edge of town, but his story changed under questioning. Even Briggs admitted later that he briefly wondered if Harold had been silenced by one of his own patients, someone desperate to keep his secret hidden. The cruelest red herring of all came in the form of a letter. Weeks after the disappearance, Harold's office received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with the words, "He's not coming back. Stop looking." The handwriting didn't match Harold's. For a moment, the police believed it might be a breakthrough, until handwriting analysis revealed it was a childish forgery, likely written by a prankster. But the damage was done. Fear deepened. Doubt spread. By summer, investigators had a list of names, sightings, and theories, but no evidence strong enough to pursue. Every lead crumbled into dust. Every suspect turned into a dead end. Harold's case was a maze of shadows, with each path leading nowhere. Yet beneath all the noise, one detail continued to haunt Chief Briggs: the journal. Its words, its warnings, its half-finished final entry. What if it wasn't paranoia? What if Harold truly had discovered something that made him a target? And if that was the case, then none of the suspects mattered. Because the real answer might not be in who hated Harold, but in what Harold had found. The deeper investigators looked, the more it seemed the suspects weren't just dead ends. They were distractions, red herrings meant to pull attention away from the real truth. But what truth? That, Maplewood would soon learn, was far more disturbing than anyone dared to imagine. By autumn of 1955, the case had gone cold. The townsfolk spoke of Dr. Harold Whitmore in hushed tones, like a ghost that still walked Maplewood streets. Chief Briggs, though officially sidelined, couldn't let it go. Late one night, sitting alone in his office, he pulled out copies of Harold's journal entries once more. He had read them dozens of times, but something gnawed at him, something he had overlooked. The cryptic notes about patients sharing the same dreams. The repeated mention of the corridor. And that final line, cut short mid-sentence. It all felt like fragments of a puzzle. Briggs decided to go back to the source, Harold's patients. One by one, he revisited them, asking carefully about their dreams. To his shock, nearly all described the same thing, though they had never spoken to one another about it. A long, endless hallway. Identical doors on either side. A presence at the far end. Some said it was a shadow. Others said it was a man. A few swore it was Harold himself, standing silently, waiting. Briggs's blood ran cold. These weren't just scattered hallucinations. They were connected, like threads of a larger tapestry Harold had been trying to unravel. The breakthrough came when Briggs met with Richard Hanley, the veteran once suspected in the case. Richard had initially been reluctant to talk, but this time he revealed something chilling. It wasn't just dreams, he said. I saw him 2 nights after he disappeared, in the corridor. Whitmore was there, staring at me. He didn't say a word. He just raise his hand, like he was warning me. Briggs dismissed it as trauma at first, but then Richard produced something tangible. From a locked drawer, he pulled out a small scrap of paper. It was a note, crumpled and yellowed, but unmistakably in Harold's handwriting. The words were scrawled unevenly, as if written in haste. It follows us from a mind into the room. Do not trust the walls. Briggs stared at the note in disbelief. How could Harold have given this to Richard if he had already vanished? Unless Richard had forged it. Unless Harold had somehow written it after his disappearance. Either explanation was impossible, and yet there it was, right in his hands. For the first time, the case veered away from logic. It wasn't about ransom, robbery, or revenge. It was about something stranger. Something Harold had been studying in secret. Briggs felt a chill deep in his bones. What if Harold hadn't been taken by a person at all? What if he had been consumed by the very thing he was trying to understand? The shared visions, the corridor, the presence that haunted so many of his patients. It was a thought Briggs could barely admit to himself. And yet, as he tucked the note into his jacket, he couldn't shake the feeling that Harold hadn't just disappeared. He had crossed into something else. Something Maplewood was never meant to see. And worse still, whatever that something was, it wasn't finished. Chief Briggs should have walked away. By late 1955, the state police had long abandoned the case. Maplewood citizens had resigned themselves to whispers, and the town council discouraged further inquiry. Let it rest, they told him. The man is gone. But Briggs couldn't rest. Not after holding that crumpled note from Richard Hanley. It follows us from a mind into the room. Do not trust the walls. The words replayed in his mind with every passing day. They were too specific, too deliberate, too unlike the ramblings of a paranoid man. Harold had known something. So, against official orders, Briggs began his own late-night investigation. He returned to Harold's office, boarded up and sealed since the spring. Breaking the lock, he entered with nothing but a flashlight and his growing obsession. The air inside was thick, stale. Dust coated the furniture, but the room still carried the heavy silence of that night. He retraced the details, the cold coffee, the scattered files, the burned-out light bulb. Only this time, he noticed something new. Along the baseboard of the eastern wall, faint scratches marked the plaster, almost like fingernails dragging across it. Leaning closer, Briggs saw they weren't random. They formed a series of short lines. 5 grouped together, then another 5, then 4. A tally. Someone had been counting. He followed the scratches downward toward the floor. There, tucked behind the radiator, he discovered a thin leather notebook wedged into the gap. Not the same journal the police had confiscated. A different one, smaller, hidden. Inside were fragmented notes, written in Harold's unmistakable hand. Patients describing the same space, long corridor, repeating doors. Patterns too consistent for coincidence. I tested with guided recall. Results identical. Corridor is real to them. If perception creates reality, what if the space is more than dream? Briggs's hands trembled as he turned the pages. This wasn't medical record keeping. It was research into something beyond science. Something Harold seemed to believe existed outside of dreams altogether. The final page was the most unsettling. A crude drawing of a hallway filled with identical doors. At the end, a dark human figure. Beneath it, Harold had written, "They see me there." What? Briggs left the office shaken, but his obsession deepened. He needed corroboration, and so he quietly revisited Harold's former patients again. This time, he asked not just about their dreams, but whether they had continued after Harold disappeared. Most said no. The dreams had stopped abruptly that spring, but 3 patients admitted otherwise. Each described the corridor again, with startling consistency. Pale walls, flickering lights, endless doors. And each, with unease in their voices, claimed they saw Harold within it. "He doesn't speak," one woman whispered, "but he looks trapped, like he's on the wrong side of the door." Richard Hanley, too, had more to share. He confessed that after Harold vanished, his dreams grew stronger. One night, Richard swore he felt himself pushed, physically shoved, while inside the dream. He woke up with a bruise on his shoulder. "It's not just in my head," he told Briggs. "It's here. It's crossing over." The evidence, if it could be called that, made no sense in a police report, but it was mounting nonetheless. Harold had been investigating shared visions. His patients had continued seeing him inside those visions after he disappeared. And now there were physical traces, scratches on the walls, bruises in waking life. By early 1956, Briggs's quiet investigation led him down a darker path. He requested access to the original journal returned by the state police. To his anger, he discovered what townsfolk had long suspected. Several pages had been deliberately removed. When pressed, the state offered no explanation. Clerical error, they claimed, but the missing pages were numbered, torn cleanly out. Too precise to be an accident, Briggs was left with a disturbing possibility. Harold hadn't been the only one aware of what he was uncovering. Someone higher up had taken an interest. Someone had ensured not all of Harold's findings saw the light of day. The more Briggs uncovered, the more he felt watched himself. Some nights, while reviewing notes in his office, he swore he saw movement in the corner of his vision, a shadow that vanished when he turned. Once, driving home, he glimpsed a man in a long coat standing by a lamppost, just as witnesses had described months earlier. By the time he stopped the car, the man was gone. The final breakthrough came not from patients or journals, but from Harold's own house. Searching through the attic, long ignored by the official investigation, Briggs found a locked trunk. Inside were letters, unsent, addressed to colleagues in Boston. The letters spoke of a phenomenon bridging dream and waking life. Harold described it as an intrusion that borrows the shape of memory to step into the present. In one unfinished draft, his words were even clearer. "The walls are not what they seem. We mistake them for barriers, but they are doors, and something has learned how to open them." Briggs sat in the dusty attic for hours, staring at those words. This was no longer a disappearance he could frame in rational terms. Harold had believed, truly believed, that he had uncovered proof of a space shared between minds. A corridor, a place where something or someone waited. And if Harold had been right, maybe he hadn't vanished at all. Maybe he'd been pulled through one of those doors. And if that were true, then Maplewood's mystery was far from over. Because once a door is opened, it doesn't stay closed. By spring of 1956, Chief Briggs was a changed man. He slept little, spoke less, and spent his nights poring over Harold's journals as though decoding scripture. His colleagues whispered that he had lost his grip. Perhaps he had. But one detail in Harold's writings haunted him too deeply to ignore. The idea that the corridor was not a dream at all. And then came the night Briggs experienced it for himself. It began with a sound. He awoke suddenly in the early hours. No alarm, no noise in his home, but an echo in his head. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, as though pacing a hallway outside his bedroom door. He rose, revolver in hand, and flung the door open. The hallway was empty, yet the sound continued, faint but steady, moving somewhere beyond the walls. That night, Briggs dreamed for the first time of the corridor. It was exactly as Harold's patients had described. Endless pale walls, flickering lights, rows of identical doors. He walked, heart pounding, until he saw a figure at the far end. At first, it was a shadow. Then, unmistakably, it was Harold Whitmore. The doctor raised a hand, palm outward, just as Richard Hanley had claimed. But this time, Briggs swore Harold's lips moved. The words were inaudible, drowned in static, but the gesture was clear. "Don't come closer." Briggs jolted awake, drenched in sweat. On his nightstand lay something that hadn't been there before, a slip of yellowed paper. His blood froze as he read the words, written in Harold's unmistakable handwriting. "You've seen it now. It's real. Stay away from the doors." The discovery shattered any remaining doubt. Harold hadn't vanished into thin air. He had crossed into whatever that corridor truly was. And worse, Harold was still trying to communicate from the other side. But the implications were terrifying. If a note could cross over into Briggs's waking life, then the barrier between dream and reality had already been breached. Harold's warning meant the phenomenon was not contained. It was spreading. The chief confided in no one. Who would believe him? Instead, he dove deeper into Harold's recovered notes, trying to piece together a method for controlling access to the corridor. Harold had experimented with guided hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and dream mapping. Several entries hinted at keys, not physical but mental triggers that opened the way in. Briggs realized, with dawning horror, that Harold had unwittingly trained his patients to walk the corridor, and in doing so, opened the door for something else to step through. The townsfolk began reporting odd disturbances that spring. Lights flickering at odd hours, footsteps in empty hallways, children waking screaming about the man with no face. Some dismissed it as hysteria fueled by the lingering memory of Harold's disappearance. But Briggs knew better. The phenomenon was no longer confined to journals and dreams. It was here, and then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. By midsummer, the corridor dreams ceased. The disturbances faded. Maplewood returned to a fragile calm. But Briggs was not reassured. He understood what no one else did. This wasn't an ending. It was an intermission. The corridor was still there behind the walls, waiting, and Harold Whitmore was still inside it. Summer's stillness didn't last. On the night of July 12, 1956, exactly 1 year after Harold vanished, the corridor returned. It began with the lights. Every street lamp on Maple Street flickered in unison. Then, in the doctor's abandoned office, a glow spilled beneath the locked door, as though someone were inside. Neighbors gathered, whispering, too afraid to enter. Word reached Chief Briggs. Against his better judgment, he went alone. The office was exactly as it had been left. Dust, scattered papers, the untouched journal on the desk. But the glow wasn't a trick of light. It pulsed faintly from the examination table. Briggs approached, heart pounding, and there, etched into the metal surface by no earthly tool, were words burned deep into the steel. The door is open. Choose wisely. And then he heard it, the footsteps. The same heavy tread he'd heard in his house. Only now they weren't in his head. They echoed in the very walls of the office. Briggs drew his revolver, though some part of him knew it would be useless. The back wall of the office began to shimmer. Plaster and paint rippled like water, revealing, beneath it, the pale corridor. The same endless hallway Harold had described. Its lights buzzed faintly, flickering like a dying hospital bulb. And then, Harold appeared. He stepped forward out of the corridor, looking almost unchanged. His coat, his tie, his wire-rimmed glasses. But his eyes, they were wrong. Empty, hollow, as though something inside him was missing. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound that came was distorted, like a voice carried through static. Don't follow. Briggs reached out, but Harold recoiled. Behind him, the corridor stretched endlessly, and shadows stirred within it. They weren't human. They moved with jerks and twitches, like broken marionettes, edging closer. The air grew colder. Briggs realized the choice in front of him. Pull Harold into the real world, or close the door forever. Harold seemed to sense it too. His eyes locked on the chief's, pleading without words. And then, for just a moment, his voice broke through clear. They're watching. If I leave, they'll follow. The shadows surged forward. Briggs staggered back, revolver raised. Harold lifted his hand in the same gesture as before, palm outward. A final warning. Then he stepped backward into the corridor. The wall rippled and sealed shut behind him. The glow vanished. When the townsfolk rushed in minutes later, they found Chief Briggs on the floor, pale and shaking. The office was ordinary again. No glowing walls, no etched words, no Harold. Just dust, silence, and the doctor's abandoned journal. The last entry, dated the day before his disappearance, seemed to confirm everything Briggs had witnessed. The corridor is real. I cannot destroy it, but I can keep it contained. If I do not return, do not come for me. To open the door twice would be the end of us all. For Briggs, the message was clear. Harold hadn't simply vanished. He had sacrificed himself, choosing to remain trapped in that otherworldly hallway to prevent whatever lurked inside from crossing over. But the greater question remained, how long could a door like that stay closed? After that night, the case of Dr. Harold Whitmore was officially closed. On paper, he was declared missing, presumed dead. The file was sealed, the townsfolk encouraged to move on. Maplewood tried to forget, but it never truly did. The office remained empty for decades. Tenants who attempted to move in complained of strange happenings. Lights flickering, walls that seemed to hum late at night, the constant sense of being watched. No business lasted more than a few months. Eventually, the building was condemned, its windows boarded, its halls left to gather dust. Chief Briggs carried the burden until his death in 1974. He never spoke of the corridor again, but among his personal effects was a note, scrawled on brittle paper. The door is not gone. It sleeps. When it opens again, someone must be ready. To this day, stories linger in Maplewood. Children dare each other to peek through the broken boards of Harold's office. Travelers swear they hear footsteps pacing the hallway when the wind is still. And every so often, a local will whisper of a dream of pale corridors, flickering lights, and doors that lead nowhere. Some believe Harold is still walking that endless hallway, keeping the shadows at bay. Others insist he became one of them, another figure lost in the static. And a few, the ones who dream too vividly, wonder if the corridor was never confined to Maplewood at all. Maybe it exists everywhere. Maybe you've brushed against it yourself. Those nights when you wake at 3 a.m., heart racing, certain you heard footsteps in an empty hall. Maybe that flicker in the corner of your vision isn't imagination, but a reminder the door isn't closed forever. And if it opens again, who will be the one to step through? So I'll leave you with a question, one that Maplewood never answered, and perhaps never can. Was Dr. Harold Whitmore a victim of forces beyond comprehension, or the guardian of something far darker, holding back a door we were never meant to open? The choice, perhaps, was never his alone.